Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cult Bar. Apparently, I don't know if you folks heard an intro. I didn't hear any of it. It said it failed to play. So apologies on that. Yeah, I did not. So I don't know why it did that on my screen. Anyway, welcome, Renee. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Yeah. What are you drinking this evening? What's in your glass?
It is called a Magic Bus. And it's tequila, Grand Marnier. It's supposed to be triple sec, but it's whatever. It's Grand Marnier. Cranberry and orange. It's a variation on a cocktail. Like, it seems like every time someone wants to make up a cocktail, they put cranberry and orange juice in it. But Magic Bus, you'll find out why later.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah. Very nice. I'm going to take you on a small journey here for my drink. I was listening to this, I'm watching this show, right? And then I was like, I need a cocktail. So I started looking up, and I was looking up Paranoid and Paranoia, and all those are like crazy complex cocktails. I'm like, that's too much. I don't want to do all that. And then I was like, okay, what about Psycho? And then I'm like, then there was one called Psycho Killer. And then I was like, okay. And then they made mention of the movie American Psycho.
Oh.
And so what I am going to do is this.
I'm very sorry, sir.
J&B straight and a Corona.
Would you like to?
I forgot that was the drink order in that. And a Corona. I like both things, but ooh.
So I've thought about that. I'm like, oh my God, that freaking scene. I haven't seen that movie in a long time. So yeah, anyway, cheers to the, also I couldn't find J&B. So this is Monkey Shoulder. It's a blended whiskey. J&B is a blended whiskeys.
Yeah.
And Monkey Shoulder is such a really nice, smooth blended whiskey. So I followed up a little, found a little 6-pack of 7-ounce Coronas, which I thought was perfect. I'm not a huge Corona fan.
You had like, instead of J&B and Corona, you had like a Monkey Shoulder and Pacifico.
That would have been funny if because I was like, I couldn't find J&B at the liquor store near me, and I didn't want to drive another 5 miles over to go to the other liquor store. So I was like,
yeah, that's the problem when we surprise each other with drinks now, which is, I think, more fun.
Yeah, we used to tell each other what they were, and now we're like,
shop.
Yeah. So yeah, there we go with our drinks. Like I said, mine is a small bit of a journey. So thanks for indulging me in that, because it's kind of a deep cut on that one. So yeah, we're gonna, let's say, not the best combination, but at least the Corona is only 7 ounces. So there's that. So yeah, before we start though, we are going to do some news.
Oh, I think it's my first time putting news up, and then I went and did it too soon. Sorry, guys. So once again, this is one of our early news items, and then a couple months ago, it was our episode. Paul Mackenzie, the death cult in Africa, he is being charged with more murder. 52 new deaths, as they have found more bodies, unfortunately. I guess like the good news, if there is any, is that he is facing justice. So they've found a new mass grave. There are 52 more bodies in it. This just keeps growing and growing. And hopefully we see the end of news updates on this sooner rather than later. And this guy is punished to the fullest extent of the law. And that's it. That's the news. It's very depressing, but also in its own way, good news. So,
yeah, seeing some justice come out of that, considering just how horrific all of that was and still is. I mean, finding more mass graves, that's nuts. That's just nuts.
Yeah,
more mass graves.
I mean, this is now we're getting into numbers that are like kind of difficult to imagine, right? When we did cover Jonestown and we spent a lot of time on it because it's hard to understand how people get caught up in something that can go that far. And to see it happen again is also really like you want to believe that if it happens once, then like a lesson gets learned and it never happens again. But then again, we live in the United States, so we know that that is not true. So
Yeah.
yeah, unfortunate. I I hope that the families at least are getting closure and they're able to identify those bodies. So I know that some of them that is actually a major challenge that they're facing is figuring out who all these people are. So
Sure. In a mass grave situation too, all the bodies like intermingle and like, especially if they're decomposed, there's a whole host
yeah.
of problems with trying to identify folks in the middle of that. So I hope those folks get to find out where their loved ones are and that guy gets what he deserves. So that was one of the weirdly, we've covered a lot of rough ones, and that one was really rough.
It was, but I feel also it's interesting. This is like we don't we follow the news in that we have a news segment on every episode, but that's not what the show is about, right? Like we're not investigative. We're more like participatory. We watch documentary, you guys watch documentary at home. We talk about it. So it's kind of interesting to have this one that we've been following, and then there is a documentary, and then it's like, oh no, wait, the story's not over. So it's almost like in another few years, we'll probably be obligated to do another full episode on these guys once this actually is resolved.
Yeah, come to fruition finally.
Yeah.
Hopefully, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So anyway, that little depressing news, we're going to get into something even more depressing. Hooray!
You're welcome.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the cult behind the killer, the Andrea Yates story. For those of you who aren't familiar, Andrea Yates back in, I believe, 2001, drowned all 5 of her kids in a bathtub. And, back then, that was just a shock story. Like, what kind of mother would do that to their kids? And,
yeah,
a lot of it was like, oh, well, maybe she was clearly mentally ill and all that stuff. Okay. But what never really was thought about or talked about really until you found this was the idea of a cult that was kind of pushing her around mentally.
I also though, and I one thing I wish the documentary had hammered a little harder is the effect of postpartum psychosis, because it almost felt like they wanted to say it was one thing or the other, when the reality is, of course, that what we saw is this is a time that postpartum depression wasn't really recognized, and postpartum psychosis is even rarer. It's not even that well understood now, and it was not really understood at all back then. And then especially with like the conservative Christian background, it's not surprising that she and her husband weren't like well versed in postpartum psychosis. But what happens with any kind of psychosis is that it can be fed, right? And we see that with, currently right now, AI is feeding people's psychosis and creating bigger delusions and more all-encompassing delusions than if they were not using Chat GPT. That's not to say that they wouldn't find another way to feed their delusions. I'm not going to get into all that, but I'm saying like it's very much like you had this thing over here that was really powerful and scary and influencing her, but that doesn't negate that she also was dealing with postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and that we have to be careful. And I struggled a lot with this, even watching the documentary. I have to be careful not to put our modern understanding on it, because the reality is, if you are a person of a certain age, right? If you're millennial, Gen X or older, then you're familiar with this story and you can kind of reach back in the recesses of your brain and remember how she was talked about, remember how her husband was talked about. people were not talking about postpartum psychosis as like a thing that could be treated or helped. They were talking about it like, well, it's just a thing that like lets evil people act, basically, right? So there's a lot to keep in mind here. I guess this is a good place for trigger warnings. Trigger warning. There's a lot of misogyny here. There is extreme child abuse because it's not just her story. There's religious and coercive control. There's a lot of talk about postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, the religious influence on childbearing, which I think I wouldn't go as far as saying that it was forced, but I think that their religious beliefs kind of made it seem like they didn't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, and I think this documentary does do a good job of this, the trauma behind growing up in a fire and brimstone household. Kids who are told that the end of the world is coming do experience a very specific kind of trauma, and that was discussed at length here. And I think that's a really good that's a good thing to touch on, because I don't think a lot of these documentaries really get in on that. And I remember the first time I heard as somebody who grew up in, they got videos, like they were in a video cult. Their mom would get these VHS tapes that talked about the end of the world and talked about like, nightmares and the anxiety and, you know, we're going to die, we're going to burn in hell, all this stuff, right? So that's another trigger warning. We're going to be talking about that. Lots of trauma from all sides. There's homelessness, there's poverty, there's, I mean, you just
physical
really
abuse too.
Yeah, you really want to be careful with this one.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot to be said, and we'll talk about as much of it as we possibly can, and we'll hit on everything that we can. But there's some things with this documentary to get a little bit into the weeds a little bit. You made a suggestion on taking notes on this, which I tried to adhere to. That was a little more difficult taking notes, but I think in the end, the organization will be a little better, I hope. So the Andrea Yates story, like I said, she murdered her 5 kids. And, this was back in 2001. So 25 years ago, so literally a quarter century ago. And I remember hearing about it, but, I was also, I was in my late 20s myself. So like, I was kind of not as paying attention. Like we weren't back then as inundated with news all the time as we are now.
Yeah. Well, and this was it. What was interesting, I had a conversation with a friend about this too, is this is around the same time that the Susan Smith thing happened. There's another mother who killed her children that was also very sensationalized in the news. Very different circumstances, but very similar treatment by the press. So these things were kind of happening in concert, like very close together. And as the press does, right? Like these are the stories that we're interested in telling right now. It doesn't mean that there was like a rash of these killings at the time. It's just, we decided to care about that at that time. Yeah.
And it was also like, there's a whole kind of concept with news is where it's like, if it bleeds, it leads. If something's sensational or something, like they're going to lead with that. And
yeah, it's post the O.J. Simpson trial.
True.
We could do a whole different live stream and meet like once a week for like a decade and not even get close to getting the impact on the news, getting into the impact on the news that trial had. So
yeah. So anyway, I remember there was one of the things, like we'll get into the weeds a little bit later, but one of the things that I had forgotten was that her husband came out and was like supportive of her, which I thought was like insane at the time. Just like, not in a million years would I be supportive of that. Now, when you learn more about it, you can kind of see his angle on it, why he thought that, but we'll touch on that. So it's
important to note he also divorced her and remarried, right? Like it's not like we see some situations where it's like the Ruby Frankie's husband in the beginning intended to stay married to her. Like, this is just another hurdle we have to get through. And then in the end, he didn't. But I think that there was a little bit more realism I think he also knew, like, I think he also understood that he bore some responsibility.
But he kept claiming that he didn't know, and so again,
We'll get there because I think that it's complicated for him. I think that
sure,
I
sure,
believe what he said.
yeah,
I don't think it's an excuse either, though.
yeah. He also felt very robotic and wooden throughout most of it to me, but um, so let's start a bit in episode 1. We have we have a cast of characters in the episode, basically 4 people, right? I think 4 or 5.
Yeah,
Um,
we have Rusty Yates, Andrea's husband, Andrea
mhm,
Yates.
mhm,
We have their kids, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary.
mhm.
Michael Warrenecki, who is the spiritual leader. Moses Storm, who is, I don't know, would you say in his 30s?
I would think so, because he was talking that he was like 3 or 4 when the whole thing when he started
All
being in
happened,
that.
yeah.
Somewhere he was around that age when Andrea had killed her kids.
And
Um,
then well, no, he was older when she killed the kids.
oh, that's right,
Yeah,
that's right. So he was like, he was I think he said 15 or 16, but 3 was
yeah.
when his family got into the whole Michael Renecki thing. So
Then
Moses
we
Storm,
have,
also a great name.
I know.
What a
Then we
name!
have David De La Isla, who encountered Michael Warrenecki on a college campus and began following him, corresponding with him. Being a follower of Michael Warrenecki is like basically writing him letters and listening to cassette tapes. And I think that we should get that out of the way early because otherwise it's going to get confusing fast if you didn't watch the documentary.
Sure,
This is not a church.
yeah, and also reading this Doomsday Rag, the
Yeah.
Perilous Times, that was part of it too.
Yeah. And that plays a really big role as we get to the end of the documentary, which I thought was very interesting. So you're reading pamphlets and newsletters, you're listening to cassette tapes, and you're having correspondence. Very rarely were his followers interacting with him interpersonally. Moses Storm's family did, and Andrea Yates' family did.
Mhm.
Like his inner circle of people did. But like David De La Isla met him on the college campus, began following him, and didn't meet him again for like a decade, and then never met him again after that. And
Yeah,
he was a hardcore, fully devoted follower who probably would have done anything that Warrenecki told him to. So
and he
that's something.
did to some degree.
Yeah, so that is something to keep in mind. It is a weird one. It's almost like it's like the early version of what we're seeing with people like Teal Swan now, right? Like
Mhm.
they're not gathering together and building a community. It's like the isolation that,
Or the Twin Flames folks.
yeah,
There's a bit of that too.
common in like in an abusive one-on-one relationship, but the impact is very wide because there's hundreds, if not thousands of members. We find out there's all these people who were controlled and abused by him, but they didn't know each other until
Mhm.
they kind of decided that they were done with him. So that is really that's another interesting thing, which
Yeah, and honestly, that was kind of the last of the kind of things that you could probably do that with, where you could get away with kind of because social media wasn't a thing yet. Online stuff was still sort of in its infancy. So, like, the idea of just writing someone and then mailing you back, here's this cassette tape, is kind of it's weird in our environment now, but
I
back
think
then that wasn't super unusual.
I feel like it's this is going to be a weird analogy, but I think that it's one of those things that kind of it works the way that bad TV worked better back then too.
Mm,
Because you have this space between where you get to fill in all the meaning you want to fill in, and you get to be excited about the next thing, and you're not necessarily going one thing to the next, like boom, 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 and
mhm.
noticing where it doesn't connect or make sense. You are getting the space. With bad TV, you just forget the stuff that doesn't make sense. And with this, I think people really they just inserted what they wanted into those spaces.
Yeah, it's almost like he's like it was a public access channel, like kind of like vibe, you know. Like
Yeah,
you could envision yourself turning into public access, and there'd be this freaking wingnut just going on about the end times and that.
I could
Uh,
see.
yeah, I would like to point out one thing that's really goofy is David de la Isla or Isla. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They didn't really specify. Um, he is a member of Tau Kappa Epsilon, which is the fraternity I was a part of.
Oh, really?
I was like, shit, he's a Teak brother. Oh my god.
Well, it's interesting though, because he's one of the ones that was like, all right, I'm done. Now I got to figure out how to help people who have been influenced by this, right? So that's good at least. So I guess we should start with the Rusty and Andrea Yates involvement here.
Yep. And we're gonna start with talking about Rusty and Andrea in just the first episode, and then
I feel like, well, one, I thought it was really kind of fucked up that they had him watch videos of his kids on camera for us to just like watch him have emotions about his dead kids. I don't know. Like I feel like I could assume that he had emotions about his dead kids without needing to see that.
Also, this is where I talked about where I felt like he was kind of wooden. Like maybe he's just a kind of guy. He's like, I can't show emotions. Maybe he's one of those kind of people, but he would clear his throat or maybe have kind of a little wetness in the eye. But I'm thinking if that was me and those are my kids and it was 20 years later, I'd still be a mess.
I believe that from what we saw, that he has not come to terms with it at all. He comes across like he's kind of put it in a box, locked it up, and pushed it aside.
Mm-hmm.
He almost talks about the kids like they went away to college.
Yeah, that he was such a joker and all that stuff. And like that's fine to have those emotions and talk about your kids and like, hey, but the fact that he didn't really listen, everybody processes grief different too. We should really acknowledge that.
It's 25 years later also.
Yeah, so maybe now he's a little bit more made his peace with it. And that sounds a little crass, and I don't mean it that way, but maybe he's like, all right, that really happened. That was fucking awful. I lost 5 kids. They'll never grow up. I'll never get to see what they do. I'll never see what kind of people they become. So maybe he's just like, I can't do anything about that. And maybe like, so I think though, if it was something like that, yes, I would be a bit of a mess, but watching videos of that would ruin me. I wouldn't be very good, but I do understand the compartmentalization. I'm pretty good at that myself. So I understand just all right, I'm put that in a box that goes up in my brain attic and I'm not going to touch that unless I really have to.
And the reason I say that is not just because of the videos, but just the way he talks about everything that happened. Like he'll say, oh, well, she was basically herself until right after Luke was born, which is the 4th kid. And it's like, I don't feel that's true just based on the way that you're describing her behavior. Right. Mm-hmm. And then like when he talks about, well, we thought that it was the stress of motherhood. So we sent her and the kids up to be, I can't remember if it was her mother or his mother.
Yeah. I think it was her mom. I think.
Yeah. But then he'll say, oh, well, we called that her nervous breakdown. And it's like, okay, that's not a nervous breakdown. Isn't something you have from being overwhelmed with the amount of work you have to do to raise 4 kids. So there's a lot of this, like, I do think, and okay, I don't think that there's probably any hardcore Christians who watch this live stream. And if there are, I haven't seen any previous ones, but I do think that that's cultural. I think that there's an element of the men are not supposed to be emotional. They're not supposed to like get wrapped up in what's going on in everybody's head. His job was to go out, make money and come home. And her job is to take care of the kids. And she's not supposed to have any negative emotions about taking care of the kids. And if she does, it's just because it's tough. And so, she goes and bees with other women, and then that's going to make it all better. And I think that what you see, you'll hear him say occasionally, like, well, I used to think that. I think there's been some level of deconstruction that was necessary because obviously the way he was living led to this tragedy, but I don't think it went as far as it needed to.
Yeah, I could see that part.
Acceptance of like, no, you do need to acknowledge that she was having mental illness, like nervous breakdown. You came home, your wife is shaking and sobbing on the floor, and then she goes to stay with family and she's staring at the wall and talking to herself. Like, that is not, there's too much laundry.
Yeah.
It's not. And I think that everybody in that situation knew it at the time, and I think he knows it now, but he's still kind of saying what he tells himself.
Well, the other part of this, the other part is, so she's taking care of 4 kids. He's working, and he works at NASA as a uber religious guy, which is that, I know that happens, but that just really kind of just fucks with my brain in ways I can't explain. But they're also living in a RV, essentially a trailer,
right,
with 6 people living in a trailer that she's homeschooling.
Yeah, the first solution is to move them out of the trailer and into a house, which, agreed. If your wife is having a hard time with 4 kids, that is definitely, move out of the trailer.
Well, first they bought a bus, but yeah.
Well, and so I guess this is what we should get into. When they met, Andrea was a nurse. He was working in the sciences. They liked each other. I don't know. They met this guy, Mike Warnecki, or Rusty already knew him. And they got
Rusty already knew him.
Deep enough in it that they were on a bus spreading the gospel with all these kids, because they got married and they just started having kids. And the agreement they made when they got married was, we're not going to do anything to prevent having kids. Again, I think that has to do with his religious background, because he said when they met, she didn't really have a religious background like his.
Mm-hmm.
But she got into this stuff. And I also think that he distances himself from Warnecki in a way that is disingenuous. That's my opinion. I don't, I have proof of that, but
agreed. I agree.
I think there's, like you said, he's a religious guy and he's working at NASA. So the chances that he is that conservative might be low, but he is the one who introduced his wife to this person. So they're homeschooling their kids. They're living on a bus, spreading the gospel, hanging out with this guy. To say, well, I just stopped talking to him, but I didn't control what she did, is kind of like, well, but you knew.
Yeah.
Like, you knew and you were okay with it. And that's something that I think is okay to admit. And maybe I would respect him more if he did say, like, yeah, like, I didn't know she was taking it as seriously as she was once we settled down in the house or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, later on, he does do some things where he's like, I wish I had never introduced her to him. But it's a little late in the game to be doing that.
Yeah.
And also he said, I came from I like when they do I'm a very traditional, blah, blah. You're just uber conservative. Don't say traditional. That's bullshit. The traditional in this country isn't always just uber conservative. That's a fallacy that we have as a country, is where we think that traditional equals American. Sorry, I'm slight tangent here, but it bothers me when I hear that.
I really don't like that either. And I think also this idea that traditional also means I wouldn't say fundamentalist, because this guy is like, Warnecki is not a fundamentalist.
Oh no, he's not. He's beyond that.
Yeah. This idea of like, you're homeschooling your kids. Your wife immediately dropped out of the workforce when you started having children. You decided not to use birth control. This is not traditional. A traditional Christian family might have a stay-at-home mom and a dad who goes to work, but they go to church on Sunday and their kids go to school.
Mm-hmm.
That's a traditional American Christian family. That's not nothing you're doing. Is living on a bus and driving around the country is not traditional.
And doing street gospels with your tiny kids is not traditional.
And that didn't, he just sort of, we only know that they did that because Moses Storm, who grew up in a family similar to the Yates that was doing all of this at the same time, tells us he was very aware of them because their family was doing the same thing. And he felt they were a threat because Warrenecki told this story that there were only a certain number of slots in heaven, and it made everybody afraid that they weren't going to get one. So in Moses's mind as a child, the Yates could get those spots in heaven, and then he was going to go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
So he was very aware that they were also living in a bus, just like we're living in a bus. They're also street preaching, just like we're street preaching. So yeah, it's very weird. It's like he wants to pretend that they met a couple times, and then Andrea started writing him letters and he didn't even really know about it. And it's like, well, that's clearly not true.
Also, this was in 2000, in the 90s or late 90s, early 2000. How the fuck was he working at NASA and traveling these places?
I am assuming
because there was no remote work back then. That was not a thing.
There was contract work. And what I think was happening is that he was probably getting short contracts, working for a shitload of money, going on the road, and then going back for a short contract when they needed more money. Then when they moved into the house, he went to work full time.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense, because I was just like, how is he pulling this off?
Because they weren't living in luxury on this bus. It was literally a bus.
Yeah, and we should talk about the bus, because they bought the bus from Michael Wernicke, and Wernicke proclaimed it to be this really fantastic shape, and it wasn't. It was just kind of this bus with not great shape. So,
that was Moses's family, wasn't it?
No, that was remember, no, because Rusty Yates said we went to go look at this bus that Michael Wernicke told us was fantastic and in great shape. We've upgraded our bus, so we want to sell this one. And like everything, it's a grift. Like he grifted David the out of a bunch of money. He said $20,000, which that doesn't sound like a lot now. That was a lot back then. So. It was a grift. They bought, and the kids wanted the bus. He said the kids wanted the bus. I'm like, yeah, don't listen to your kids when it comes to housing.
Oh, Jesus bus. Yeah. This is the other thing that I don't like is he says he lost touch with the Warreneckis after Luke's birth, but didn't discourage Andrea from continuing to write. That is such a lack of accountability.
Yeah, and you're supposed to be the man. You're supposed to be the one that runs things, right? That's how that's supposed to work.
That is what it is, right? It's like, well, you're the one educating the kids. You're the one at home with time to write letters. So, that's your job, and my job is to go to work. What? I don't believe it for a second. I'm sorry. I just don't. And I think it's important on a lot of levels. Okay. You know what? I feel like I'm getting off track from what I want to do. I have so much more empathy for this guy than is coming across right now, because his lack of accountability is very frustrating. But I do think that a lot of it probably comes from the way he was treated in the press. So I'm going to stop beating up on him for a second and move back a little bit. After Andrea's first issues with postpartum depression, which do seem like they verged into psychosis, but not violent psychosis, she was he moved them into a real house. He sent her to be with family and get help with the kids. He had her hospitalized. He got her on medication. Now, I remember when I was a teenager when this happened. When this was in the news, it was like that piece of shit didn't give a crap that she was suffering. He just kept getting her knocked up. that's clearly not what we see. We see somebody who's working very hard to get his wife help,
Yeah.
but he didn't have any understanding of mental illness. I believe that. I believe he had no understanding of mental illness. I believe he still doesn't really have an understanding of mental illness, which is why he's not able to be accountable for his role in these things, right?
But that
So
is not atypical of Christianity, because a lot of the fundamentalist evangelicals really do not believe in like therapy and all that. They don't believe in
right,
mental illness on that level. However, they will use that as a scapegoat for quote lone wolves who shoot people in schools. But
right.
be that as
But
it
I
may.
would say that even your average middle of the road person in the late 90s wouldn't necessarily be going to that lengths to get their spouse psychological help.
Yeah, that's quite true.
It just wasn't common at all, and it was even less common in conservative households. So I do want to point that out, because it does change the narrative that we were presented. When you realize he says he talked to the doctors and they said, well, this could happen again if she gets pregnant again. And he left believing basically that, like, the problem is that they waited too long to get help. And that if this happened again, they would just get her help right away and get her the meds right away and it would be okay. He said it was like, to me, it was like the flu.
Yeah, what a comment.
But I believe that he thought that. And I believe that they didn't do a good job of explaining it to him.
That's quite possible.
I hear people get explanations of mental illness now that sound like the dumbest shit I've ever heard. And we talk about it regularly in open discussion.
Mm-hmm.
25 years ago, if you said postpartum psychosis, people were like, what the fuck are you talking about? I've never even heard those words together.
Yeah.
So I think, there's this thing of like, he was not sat down. Andrea was not sat down and told there's a massive risk of serious mental trauma happening if she gets pregnant again. There's a serious risk of like serious mental illness that can't be fixed.
Or if you go off your meds.
Or if she goes off her meds, that there's a serious risk of her harming herself or others. He said when he saw her doing what he read as a suicide attempt, it still never crossed his mind that she was a danger to the children. And I believe that, because today we hear people talk like that. Well, sure, people would do this or that. They'd beat their wife, they'd hurt themselves, they'd whatever, but they'd never hurt their kids. And it's like, well, when you beat your wife, you're hurting your kids, actually.
Yeah.
So it's like there wasn't any come to Jesus moment where the seriousness of her mental illness was discussed with either of them. And when she decides to go off her meds, he's still viewing it the same way that he would view a physical illness. And that is how mental illness is still talked about sometimes. And it's like, but it's not the same as a physical illness, like any physical illness. It's the same as like a physical illness like diabetes, where you have to take medication every day or you die.
Mm-hmm.
Not like a cold where if you get better, you stop taking medication. And so I do think that in all of this around how awful this cult was, he was also victimized by Warrenecki.
Oh, no doubt.
And he didn't have the appropriate knowledge set to understand what was happening with his wife mentally. I really believe that. And I think that to this day, there are people who don't understand postpartum psychosis. When we hear about women who have postpartum psychosis and it manifests as a fear that they are going to harm their children, not actual harm, but a fear, people immediately turn on those mothers. They do not understand how postpartum psychosis works. And that is something that we really need to be clear on. The other side of it is like, we understand scientifically why babies get left in hot cars and die.
Mhm.
And people don't say to themselves, that is why I will put a mirror in the back seat. That is why I will always make sure my briefcase is back there. They say, if you have to put your purse in the back seat, if you have to put something important in the back seat to remember your baby isn't important enough to remember, you're fucking evil. And it's like, no, that's not the problem. That's not what's happening when these incidents take place. They're not evil, right? We have a tendency, because especially if you're a parent yourself, you can't imagine wanting anything terrible to happen to your kids, that if somebody does something that results in harm or, God forbid, death of their child, they're a piece of shit, they're evil. But with postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, with things like leaving your kids in the car, a lot of it comes down to things that are outside the person's control and are
Mhm.
preventable if you acknowledge it can happen to you. The person who's most at risk for any of these horrible things happening to their kids is the person who's like, couldn't happen to me. Because they're not looking for the signs. They're not taking precautions. They're not talking to their doctor,
Mm.
whatever. So I do want to get that out of the way, because, like, God, this guy drove me nuts. But at the same time, I think that he was also done a disservice by the doctors that treated his wife. And I think he went to lengths a lot of people wouldn't have gone to get her help. And then he was basically sent away feeling like, okay, we're all done.
Yeah. Listen, I struggle with him a lot. I do.
Obviously, me too.
Yeah, but just the idea of like I said, a lot of it is in the way he just talks about things feels very, like I said, wooden. It's robotic. There's folks in my life who are very non-emotional like that, and they
Yeah.
approach things and like I'm going to be very stoic, and that's what I'm supposed to do because that's my role. And there is a bit of that with the whole I'm the man, I'm the making them breadwinner, I'm supposed to be I'm the rock, I'm the one that has to hold things together and just all that. Not, I think that's part of it because in the quote unquote traditional sense, that is a normal thing, is that like you're not supposed to be upset, you're not supposed to cry, you're not supposed to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of that is something that is so ingrained in him that he doesn't know how to actually
Well, and I think
doesn't actually know how to cope.
when you combine all of that with trauma, what you get is somebody who has like no idea how to even access their emotions.
Yeah, that I could see.
Or just the fear that, like, if I let one emotion out, then they're all going to come out and I'm never going to be able to stop.
Mhm. Yeah, there is just on just like a purely personal note. Like I kind of, as much as I kind of wanted to style myself as someone who's evolving and all that stuff for a long time, I was very much not a person that would in. I always thought in a stressful situation where there is grief, I need to be the one that people can rely on. They can cry on my shoulder. And I'm there for them. But I never allowed myself to be that person, to be the person that needed someone else to rely on. And I had a heart attack, and after that, that really changed. I really had to reevaluate how I was looking at stuff. And you would, in my brain, that the idea that he lost 5 kids, that would just super change my perspective. But I'm also wasn't raised in a incredibly restrictive religious thing.
Yeah.
Well, and then got another guy who was telling you everything's terrible, you're all going to hell, and let me just pound on that and make you feel shitty about everything you're doing. And he didn't. I honestly don't think he paid much attention to that stuff. He said specifically he liked that he was edgy.
Yes.
And that was the thing. I don't now. Whereas Andrea very clearly took all that shit to heart, and I don't think he did.
Well, and I think this comes across over several episodes as we find out what Warrenecki believes about women and child rearing, basically, despite the fact that he has a wife and kids.
6 kids.
He thinks women are evil and have to be like reined in and controlled, and that men who are not spiritually developed they shouldn't be married because it's going to fuck them up. And Andrea was not just communicating with Warnecke, but also with his wife, Rachel, who believed all these things and believed that about herself, and was, I think, reinforcing the idea that, well, you feel like a bad mother because you are a bad mother, and you feel like a bad wife because you are a bad wife. And the reason that you're a bad mother and a bad wife is because you aren't a good enough Christian or good enough whatever, right? And I think we have several things at play. There's the belief that at a certain age, I can't remember what they said, the age of what
12.
12. Okay. So Warnecke believes the age of accountability is 12 years old. Different religions have different ideas about that. He says 12. If your kids
Catholicism is 7.
Yeah, Mormons are 8. Whatever. So if you're 12 years old, you're responsible for everything that you do. But before 12, if you die, great news, you get to go to heaven. You're not part of the count. But after 12, you're part of the count. And from what Moses Storm was saying, he was raised to believe the count was like, it could be like 8 people. It could be like
and the Reneckes were a family of 8.
Yeah. So she's being told she's a bad mother. They're going to turn 12. They're going to live a bad life because I'm a bad mother. You see how if you're already in postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, you're not thinking straight. She said that she was talking, like Rusty saw her talking to the wall. That really, not even just in the moments before this happened, but like while she was staying with family and he was there, like it was a thing that happened. She believed, due to the communications with the Warneckes, that Satan was literally inside of her. Not how you hear it metaphorically in a lot of hardcore Christian people, there's the devil's in me, or making me do it. She really believed that she was possessed by Satan. Well, somebody possessed by Satan is not going to raise children who are going to make it to heaven. Then we find out in the last episode that the last newsletter that went out had a whole thing about evil, horrible women who are raising children that are going to stumble and burn in hell. So when you hear that she very calmly called the police and just said, send a police officer over, and very calmly told her husband he needed to come home, and just was like, yep, I killed my kids. It sounds really fucking evil. But then you think, well, maybe Moses's reaction is right, where he was like, oh, she did it. She saved them.
Yeah, he even said to Rusty later on, like, I was jealous because I was beyond the age of 12. And there was no chance that I was going to be there. And I was jealous of your kids dying. And that's quite a fucking thing to say to a guy who had 5 of his kids killed.
I think he needed to hear it, though, because that was after he met with Moses, was the first time he acknowledged truly that Warnecke was dangerous. Up until that point, it was like, oh, well, he had influence of whatever.
But she was really mentally ill, and he kind of always leaned on that versus the fact that Warnecke had all this way of affecting her, and Renecke's wife too, because Renecke's wife was like, she was fucking awful. She was just as bad. Yeah. To Andrea specifically, just being like, you only have this amount of time. You really have to get your shit together because you need to save your kids, and otherwise you're going to hell, and you don't have anything you can do about it. And Andrea, like, the one thing the documentary does really well is gives you a line of thought on Andrea Yates that I've never thought of. Just like I never knew the depths of how hard the postpartum hit her, or how deeply disturbed she was because she had all these factors. She had the postpartum, she had this guy telling her that no matter what you do, you're not good enough. And Renecki was a shithead. He would say, just, you're never going to make it. You're just not. You're just not there. You're not going to. And he would just, like, he didn't give people hope. He just gave them fear on top of fear on top of fear, which sounds quite a bit like a certain political party and evangelical party we have around right now. But anyway.
A little bit.
Could that be
that's the
Satan?
thing that is interesting is that when we encounter a lot of the like Christian cults, what we see is a lot of like, well, the community was really good and the message started out as really positive and like a lot of like good feelings in the beginning. But with this, you hear a lot of like, oh no, like I liked that he was in your face about it. I liked that he was, being real about the risks or whatever. Like it's always been negative. It's never really been a positive, cushy anything.
Yep.
And I think that that's worth noting because the likelihood of somebody who's already vulnerable attaching to that is so much higher, because it's like, well, you're telling me I'm a piece of shit and offering me some path to get through it while being honest with me. Finally, someone's being honest with me. Everybody else says I'm not a piece of shit, but I know I am. So at least this guy's being real. And I think that that is a way a lot of very vulnerable people feel. And that's why it worked, I think it's worth getting into Moses' story now because we've talked a lot about Andrea Yates, and I don't think that we want to get like super deep into. She killed her kids, and it's fucking horrible. Like that. I don't know that we need to get into detail there, right?
Yeah, and we can suffice to say that just two things on her before we move on is just the idea that she got convicted and she was sentenced to life. And then there was a thing where she got a retrial based on an SVU episode that never existed.
Well, yeah. So the
Law and Order episode.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. We should talk about that. So the prosecutor said that she was lying, that because her attorneys were like, they brought up the Warrenecki stuff. They said that she was afraid her kids were going to go to hell, and then she drowned her kids in the bathtub. And the prosecutor's like, that's a defense that she dreamed up after watching a Law and Order episode with the same plot. And she got convicted on that despite the fact that Law and Order had no such fucking episode.
Yep.
She got a retrial, and that is like those. Even then, the jurors had some holdouts. They requested a full copy of the newsletter, and that is where they went, holy shit, yeah, like. Yeah,
because they'd only seen a small portion of it. But the point I wanted to make there is that now she is still being held in an institution where, if she gets out, I would be surprised just because the damage she's had done to her mentally is it's extreme.
There's also, if you, I don't know how to say this, like, this is my opinion, so I'm not legally responsible for how you take this opinion. There's also a suggestion that some of the places that treat people who are either considered incompetent for trial due to mental illness, or who, like Andrea Yates, are receiving treatment because they were not guilty by reason of insanity, protect the patients in certain ways. And so knowing that somebody going out into public life would likely be target of things that would damage their mental health or put them at risk physically, maybe they would not let that happen as easily as other mental hospitals would allow that to happen.
For sure. So anyway, let's move on to Moses, but I just wanted to get that out there that she is currently at an institution being cared for, and hopefully she's getting the help she needs. So anyway, let's go on to our guy Moses Storm. Again, great name. when I saw that name, I was like, that can't be a real name. But there's a singer I
have to
know.
assume, given what we talked about his childhood.
Yeah, but I will say there's also a singer I know who I rather like, whose name's Storm Large, and that's her real name. So some
Yeah.
people just get the lottery with names. So
So yeah.
Moses Storm did not hit the lottery in a lot of ways, but in the naming convention, he very much did.
I can't remember who it was, but very recently someone was like, "Oh my God, I didn't know that Pickup was your real last name. I thought that was just something you used on social media." No, that's my real name.
Yeah, I don't have that thing with my last name. I don't get any surprises on that, other than the fact that people try to misspell it all the time. But yeah.
So Moses was the fourth of 5 children, and his mother was the niece, Michael Warnecki. That's how they encountered him.
Mm-hmm.
Because almost everyone else we speak to encountered him at a college campus. That's how Rusty Yates met him. That's how the other people met him. Different college campuses, because this was part of his thing, right?
Can I jump in on that real quick before we go?
Yeah.
This is very reminiscent of Charlie Kirk. I'm going to be an older man, and I'm going to go in college campuses and talk to people who aren't mentally quite fully formed.
Yeah, who don't know that they're not prepared to debate me.
Exactly. That was just a point I wanted to make, because that's when I saw that Charlie Kirk, the original Charlie Kirk. So anyway, please go.
So Moses says, and this is like, okay, this is what I'm going to say. Excuse me. I don't think there's any reason to distrust Moses, but I also believe that given what we know of his childhood, his perceptions could be a little skewed. He says that the similarities between his family and the Yates family were down to the haircuts that they had. That the Yates child, Noah, was named after his older brother. That could be true, or it could just be that Noah is a very Christian biblical name, things like that. I don't know.
And it could have been something his mother told him that he just assumed it was true.
Right, exactly. So they're so into Warnecki's stuff that he would have regular nightmares about Armageddon coming and the end of the world coming. That if there was like a storm outside, his mother would fall to her knees in prayer and beg God to save her children, because I guess she thought maybe this is it, which is, I can't imagine living this way. Like, I really can't imagine having kids and putting them through this, but
I can, because I'm married to somebody who was put through the whole rapture upbringing. So,
I mean, like, I can't imagine being the person doing it.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm just saying, like, there were my wife and her sister but had quite a few nightmares about the idea that they'd wake up and their family would be gone and they would be part of the rapture. So I'm sure that's something in vain, maybe not as severe as what Moses Storm went through, but I can understand.
Well, I think it is, though, because the thing about the rapture is the people who get left behind live in hell on earth, right?
Yeah,
so it is very similar. Yeah. So, and then his sister had visions of the end of the world, of Armageddon coming, and they were so intense that she would beat on herself to try and make them stop.
Mm.
And this, I feel like, was probably encouraged by the family, that they were real, that they were visions and not, I don't know, hallucinations or daydreams or whatever.
Right.
So this is how deep in this they were. This is how upsetting this was. This goes back to what we mentioned earlier of him. He heard that as a teenager, he heard that Andrea Yates killed all 5 of her children. And he was like, wow, like, they get to go to heaven and I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he felt like he completely understood what happened. And it just, made sense to him.
And that he said he would have gone to the bathtub.
Yeah.
He said, I would go, I would have done, she told me to go to the bathtub, I would have done it.
Well, I think on that too, there's two levels to that, right? One is like, well, dying is your ticket to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to worry about hell. And then two, we learn that like the level of discipline that was expected of the children was so high that I think there's an element of like, would you have even questioned why you're being told? Because God forbid that you do that. He talks about when his family went to visit the Warreneckis, they drove their bus to where the Warreneckis had their bus, and all of them were together. And he said something that was read as being haughty, that Warrenecki himself beat the living shit out of him.
Yeah, and said, I need to show you how to beat your kids or something, like spank your kids. Spank
he
was
was
the word they used.
Horrified that Moses' father was not beating him enough, because they were being beaten, just not enough, right? So yeah, and he talks about, they're 3 years old, and he's 3 years old. His mom comes home and is like, we're doing this, we're getting a bus, we're driving around, and he's 3 years old telling people they're going to go to hell. If they were going to go see the Warreneckis, they would be getting like drilled on Bible verses and sit up straight and like all this stuff, like
make videos.
Oh yeah, making videos to send to him to show how good they were. And they had all this high pressure because, and this is, you hear it from Moses was a child while this was happening, but you hear this from Delilah as well. Delilah? It's like they felt like Warrenecki, his opinion counted on whether or not you were going to be one of the people who made it to heaven.
Yep.
It wasn't just that he's telling you like there's a limited number of spaces, but also like he gets a say, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, not kind of, but it's super fucked up just the way that they kind of viewed. I mean, we always say that with cults, like how the fuck could you think about that? But like that's the thing, they were indoctrinated to think that like the world was going to end, and your approval, your card to get into heaven was through this guy.
Yeah.
And this guy alone, who was said he was he wasn't a prophet. He didn't use that terminology. He was like, he was basically an emissary of God to show you and shepherd you into this way. And, he said just inflammatory shit. And the idea that like when this all came out and suddenly like Andrea Yates killed her kids, and then they were like, oh, who's this pastor? And then he started getting heat, and he didn't like that at all.
No.
And because now all of a sudden he's getting heat, and obviously he and Rusty, I think, got his cues from him on this was, oh, she was just mentally ill. And I think that's where Rusty kind of like, I'm going to glom onto that.
Well, and at some point, also in Rusty's defense, this wouldn't have happened if she wasn't mentally ill.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Like postpartum psychosis is 100% the main causal factor. It's just that Rusty thinks I'll get her help, and David and Rachel Warrenecki are like, we're going to tell her she's a piece of shit and her kids are going to hell, which feeds her belief that she's a piece of shit and her kids are going to hell, which feeds the psychosis, which, so it's like this perfect storm of awful shit that happened while she was mentally ill.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so I just want to say, like, here's some things that Warrenecki said, and this is a little bit from Moses, a little bit from other people in the documentary. Spank them so hard it hurts the Bible says wounds scar away evil or scare away evil. That might be a typo on my part.
Yeah.
He had this whole thing about becoming a butterfly that he would share, like because he had these pamphlets and everything, and the butterfly was a metaphor for you being saved. But if how is a butterfly made? It is a caterpillar that goes into a cocoon and is isolated, and it suffers and turns into goop. It's completely broken down. Like, it's this really horrifying kind of thing when you think about it from a human perspective. And he says, it's going to be a life of solitude if you want to become a butterfly, but butterflies go to heaven. And Moses says, yeah, okay, well, who became a butterfly? Nobody became a butterfly. He said that all women inherit a witchcraft nature due to Eve's sin. He called all women contentious women, including his own wife was a contentious woman. That women need to be your servants, not your wives. Quote, I have to constantly confront my wife with her contentious nature. At the heart of every woman is a powerful sword of Satan meant to demean and oppress a man of God and nullify God's word. Until a man has had direct revelation from God, he shouldn't be married because the contentious woman will distract him from God. Oh, you want to get what you deserve? You deserve hell. That was on one of the tapes that he sent, I believe, David. So this is the kind of stuff that he's feeding people. And you have to remember that the tapes were personalized also. It wasn't like he preached a sermon and made 100 copies of the same tape.
Right.
He specifically went after these people's very specific fears, wants, and desires to fuck with them the way that they needed to be fucked with. So like when Moses's mom and dad got divorced, he fucked with her in a way that was like, well, you got to win back my respect and my good graces because you went and got divorced. And she believed that and played along with it. Right. And so there's a lot of this stuff that's particularly strange that we don't see usually in our cults because there's not a lot of specifically individually tailored manipulation like this.
True.
These guys don't have the time in a day to specifically an hour at a time preach to everyone instead of preaching to the whole group. But this guy had however many hours on the road by himself, having his wife write letters. She probably did most of the writing in the newsletter too, realistically.
For sure. The Perilous Times. Yeah. What a name.
I think it's interesting that in the divorce, Moses' mom got the kids and his dad got the bus.
Yeah. Why would you want the bus over there? Well, I know why, because you thought you were going to go proselytize, but the idea of as a dad who's been divorced, the only thing I cared about in the divorce was how much am I going to see my kids? That was me. And I was terrified.
But he got rid of his contentious woman and his distracting children so he could go be a butterfly in his life of isolation.
Yeah. Folks like that, oh, you want the bus? Imagine being a kid and your dad being like, I just want the bus.
But I would also say, remember.
Are you going to try to justify that? Because please do.
At all. I'm not. We actually don't know that he said he wanted the bus. We just know that that's how it shook out. But he wasn't going to get the kids anyway. He was going to get every other weekend. It was 2001. Or no, sorry.
Yeah.
They divorced in 1988. So he was going to get every other weekend at most. But she chose to move out of state. So.
Yeah. And also, again, so there's a lot of things I can talk about on that as a child of divorce and then also being divorced myself, the idea of the out-of-state thing is different. So for instance, I live in a different state than my sons from my first marriage. They're an hour away. It's literally an hour from my house. They're in a different state, but they're not far. But growing up, my biological father and my mom divorced, and my mom moved to Pennsylvania from Miami, Florida. I never saw my biological father ever again.
Yeah.
So there's this odd thing of just being like, I know I'm immediately judgmental, but it's because of my own trauma is the idea of like abandonment and like, oh, well, you're going to move states away. How do you allow that? He might have been like, I don't have the money to fight that. I'm
Well,
good with that. Like, we don't know. We don't know.
in
So
1988, you couldn't fight it
no, you couldn't.
unless there was like actual horrific abuse happening. And he didn't think that, like, he didn't think that there was
Yeah.
horrific abuse happening, but he didn't think it was abuse. He was going to do the same thing. Like, he wouldn't have won because she'd be like, he does it too. Like, you know.
Yeah. And I will say that in 2009, yeah, when I got divorced, my attorney's advice was make your ex-wife happy. That was his advice. I
Oof.
paid that man thousands of dollars, and his advice was do not upset her, because the less you upset her, the more favorable it'll be for you. That was in 2009. This was way before that. So like almost 10 years before that.
No,
So,
no. It was in 1988 when Moses'
oh,
parents got divorced. Yeah.
so it was more than that. So it was almost
That was
20. It was 20 years. So
years
yeah,
ago.
imagine that. So like in '88, you were just kind of the dad. You were just kind of, well, if I'm going to get divorced, I'm going to get fucked on this. Now, granted, the other thing was like in that time, like I don't think women were getting the coverage they needed to help at that point either. So they might have gotten all the kids, but they didn't get any support out of it. Like, so
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm not saying like, oh, feel sorry for Moses' dad at all. I'm
I
just
know.
saying that he could have fought for custody tooth and nail and still only ended up seeing him every other week. Like the most he would have got is preventing them from moving to California. But I also don't think they had an address. So like that's the other thing. Like where would this custody battle, where's the jurisdiction of a custody battle when you live on the road? It's very we would have to have a whole different documentary series to understand
Yeah,
how the divorce would even work. Like
no idea.
yeah. So but the point of making note that she got the kids, he got the bus, is that she then made the kids break into the bus to steal the tapes because she believed that they would get into heaven if they didn't have the tapes.
It is funny, just like the weird levels you'll go to when you are just completely indoctrinated into whatever it is. Whatever it is, doesn't like in this case it's religion, but like it's just interesting how they sent Moses, who was like small at the time because he was small enough to get in a window. And imagine that he's small enough to get in a window, and he wasn't super duper. Well, he was young, but like he's small enough to crawl into a bus window, which means those kids weren't being fed well because they were living on a fucking bus.
Now remember though, this was 1988, and in 2001 he was a teenager. So
that's what I'm saying. Like he's
younger than me. So no, is he?
But even so, being like, hey, I'm going to send you on this mission into this bus, and it's terrifying because it's your dad.
Yeah.
And I'm going to steal these things.
Yeah.
But the justification is that's because what's going to, but you're going to steal from your father. But the justification is that will help you get into heaven. And that is just a mind fuck of giant.
And now you would get, if it did go to court, that would be, points against you for parental alienation. You have to steal from your dad or you'll go to hell.
Yeah, but again, that was damn near 30 years ago. Well, 40 years ago now.
Almost 40 years ago, yeah. So, because it's they start with the Yates in the first episode and give us a little bit of Moses' story, and then they kind of go back in time. So that's why the timeline got a little mixed up. But this took place in 88, and then the thing with the Yates took place in 2001.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we could spend all day on this. but we don't have all day. So I'd say I'd like to talk about David because I think there's a lot, like, I feel really bad for David. I feel like
me
he
too.
lost his whole life in a lot of ways. Not that he doesn't have the opportunity to do all the things he wanted to do, but it sounds like he was somebody who was very driven and like prepared for a very successful life. And then he meets Warnecki and gets really far in over his head really fast. And he does it with one of his best friends. So possibly, the person that you would hope would pull you out of the crazy thing is actually also fully invested in the
Also
crazy
in it. Yep.
But
Also,
like he was so invested that he felt bad about having a job because that was holding him back from going on the road and preaching. But then also he's sending thousands of dollars to Warnecki that he could only afford because he had this job.
yeah, there's this, it's a weird thing. Like, also, I'm going to say something that's going to sound really weird. David gave me we use the term gaydar a lot, and he was giving me that vibe, but he also was not. He had very clearly had a relationship with a woman who he broke off because Warnecki told him he was not ready for marriage. And then later on, he had a daughter, I think, later on with someone. So like,
I don't think it's gaydar. I think it's a version of what you kind of feel when you meet very, very hyper super fucking evangelical men, where you're like, are you compensating with the religion?
Yeah, it's just an act or
not.
No.
But I think it's because he's very submissive. And I don't think he's fully recovered from the spiritual and emotional beatdown at all.
Not at all. Also, Warnecki basically pulled the whole alpha male thing. That was the thing. And David just very much is not, just, you could tell he's just not a dude that he's not like super forceful. That's not who he is. He's not a hyper aggressive person. Now, he also was in sales for General Mills and made a lot of money, but sales is a different skill set than being, I am this hyper masculine person.
Yeah, that doesn't sales.
And that doesn't translate. You can be very good at sales. You also doesn't mean you're an alpha male hyper aggressive person, and he's not. And it's just interesting that like he talked about when he had this girlfriend who was actually it was his fiance, I believe, where he was like, this is the person, and Wernicke's like, you're not ready, and he's like, well, when he said, I'm going to play some tapes from this guy, and she's like, I really don't know about that, and it's like, okay, well, you're out. And that's the thing. That should have been the ding, ding, ding. That should have been the bell that rings that tells you that shit's
Here's the
off.
thing. I think that what we know about him shows us he fits a pattern, right? So he says he came from a super traditional Hispanic family with 3 sisters, and he joined a fraternity because he wanted to have brothers. And then he liked Warnecki because he was calling out the hypocrisy of Christianity. And it's like, okay, if I do some math here, this is somebody who had some challenges with the way he was raised.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than figuring out exactly what that was, he just kind of ran in a different direction. And I think, you have to think, like, when you're in college, you're not that smart. I'm sorry, it's true. You think you are, you're not. And this is like, where is my, he talks about like heavily into Warnecki's tapes and tracks by college graduation, but he says he felt spiritual schizophrenia. Like he wanted to be proud of himself for being the first person in his family to attend and graduate college, but he believed that Warnecki would think that he was a faker because if he really was following Warnecki's teachings, then he wouldn't care about that.
Yeah.
And yeah, God, I just feel really like he gets a good job, but then he feels guilty about having the job. And then, he is getting letters from Rachel as well. Right? That is all about the contentious women and all this bullshit. And he says, now suddenly I'm seeing women being oppressed by men everywhere I look. Or the other way around.
Men being oppressed by women. Yep.
Yeah. Because
Alan Peg Bundy and like, yeah, that's
and that's like, if you look, like, what is funny to me is that if you go back and watch an episode of Married with Children, it's like, that's not what's actually happening, is it?
no, not at all.
Not even close. Anyway, I'm so oppressed while I sit here on the couch and I'm an asshole to my wife who does everything.
If I had the dudes that would be like, yeah, everybody loves Raymond is my life. And I'd be like, then you're a dope. You're adult. That is.
Yeah. I'm an idiot who makes my wife do everything. And so sometimes.
And then I act like an idiot if she wants me to do something and I don't want to do it, I'm just going to act like an idiot. I'll do the weaponized incompetence thing. And it reeks of all that to me.
Yeah, and David says, I believed I was Michael's most devoted and loyal follower, except for the one thing that my job was holding me back. He gets to the point where this is after his engagement has ended again, because Warnecki told him that he can't get married. Mm-hmm. He goes and takes all these tapes and all the tracks and all the reading up to the mountains and like isolates himself and does nothing but read and listen to the tapes. And he's trying to have a spiritual breakthrough and it doesn't really work. And then he nearly kills himself because, again, Warnecki's teachings are personalized, they're individualized, and they're telling him, you deserve hell. That's what you deserve. You're not good enough.
Yeah. And the thing is like he had a gun he's basically in his mouth. Like he was going to do it. And then he just decided not to. And then it's interesting when you see someone who goes to that level and then goes, what the fuck am I doing? And then just that is like a turning point for them to be like, all right, now I need to figure out what the fuck's going on because I shouldn't be here.
And but that's not what happened. It's not till later. After that, he gets the really weird video from Warnecki where Warnecki is pretending
to be the devil.
Yeah. And then he starts starting to have like these ideas. And this is what's crazy because David didn't have like a diagnosed mental illness where he would be expected to have delusions or hallucinations, but he is imagining that the devil is speaking to him all the time after this. He is in a state, I think, of stress that's causing this. He doesn't say that that's what's causing it, but it's like he nearly killed himself. He gets this weird video. Now he's seeing Satan everywhere he goes.
Right.
So he writes David a letter and he says he wants to meet, and he brings this buddy and Warnecki's like, meet me at McDonald's, which is like, I couldn't deal with that. That was so weird to me. But they go and meet him, and he just tells them both that they don't have what it takes. He says
he dresses them down at McDonald's.
Yeah, he says, you're more deluded now than ever to David, and tells Richard there's no hope for you at all. And they go home. They go to their respective homes, but then Richard comes to David in the middle of the night ready to kill himself because it's like, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to hell. I want to just get it over with. And he stayed up all night on suicide watch with his friend. I mean, this is like, such fucking trauma for both of these men, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then, this story breaks of his involvement with the Yates family. And that's when he kind of, I think, has his full, like, how many other people is he ruining? He says, I knew what he did to my life. Oh my God. How far can this go?
Yeah.
And then after that first trial, he's like, he was getting away with it because it didn't play that hard in the trial. You know, Moses and David are both like, no, the shit he's doing makes people crazy. And I think that that is something that does need to be acknowledged, because perhaps without the postpartum psychosis, Andrea Yates wouldn't have killed her children, but she may have killed herself.
Yeah, that's very possible. Postpartum is a really difficult thing to navigate on the best of terms, when you have all the support in the world. And so she didn't. You know, Rusty was kind of. I feel like he was in absentia. I don't feel like he was
Clueless.
Yeah, just clueless, in absentia, however you want to review it. So she didn't really have a support system. So, like, you know, it's difficult for people to be like, well, that's, you know, she should have not done that. Yeah, but she thought she was not being a good enough mother to keep her kids out of hell, eternal damnation, and was being told that repeatedly over and over again.
To the point that it's repeating when she's not being told it. And like I say, we see this with David. And David doesn't have psychosis, but David's experiencing it. Well, he doesn't have a diagnosed psychosis. I think it's possible he had some kind of religious psychosis in that moment that it was happening. But
for sure. Yeah. I mean, Andrea even said, like, when she was being interviewed by like a psychiatrist, she thought the cartoons that she was watching with her kids were telling her that, like, Satan was there. Like, that's where she was. And she was saying it in such a monotone, matter of fact way. Like, when you see the interviews, when they're replaying those, and you're just like, there's no way she is thinking that. She just thought she was the worst mother and that her kids were damned. And she's just like, how am I going to prevent them from spending eternity in hellfire? Is like, I could kill them, and then that way I may be damned, but they are not. Like, I could see the bridge to that. I could see, does it make sense to folks who are not experiencing a mental crisis? No. But she was in the middle of a mental crisis, and I could see being in that headspace, being like, if I do this, at least they're not 12 and they're not susceptible to being just stuck.
You have to remember too that for people who believe in life after death, that's eternity.
Yeah.
So this life is nothing. Whatever happens here is like, yeah. So I don't fucking believe in that. So to me, I'm
me either.
Well, you know, that's crazy. Like, this is the most important thing. But if you believe in that, then it's like, well, either I do this and I cut their time on this planet short, or they are burning in hellfire forever, for thousands of years, for time that is unimaginable to, like, incomprehensible to the human mind. And it's like, okay, that's bullshit. But
to them, it wasn't.
Billions of people believe that. Billions of people believe that.
And in different religions. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, probably, if you could realistically measure it, probably the majority of people believe in something like that. So you can't say that was the crazy part. That's not the crazy part. The crazy part was where we do this thing as human beings, where it's like, well, it's not crazy to believe in God, and it's not crazy to believe in life after death, but it is crazy to do things that you think will protect your children from an eternity of hellfire. That's crazy, actually, right? Because we're asking people to do some, like, that's cognitive dissonance. So when it comes in and someone's telling you what you're doing is going to send your kids to hell, and then you add a mental health crisis in there, it's hard to see it going any other way. When you actually lay out what she really believed, how common that belief is, just about how life works, then add in these specific religious teachings and the postpartum depression that led her, the two things together that led her to believe, I'm doing more harm to my children by keeping them alive and being in their life. You know, what was she going to do? Say, okay, David Warnecke, Rachel Warnecke, come adopt my kids. They probably weren't going to take her kids.
No, they wouldn't have. They would
not. Not that I want that outcome for those children either. You know, if I had a time machine, that's not what I would have suggested. But yeah, it's crazy because we have these things as a society where we're like, oh, it's fine if you believe in that. It's like, but what is the actual implication of believing in that? The actual implication of believing in that is that, oh, wouldn't it be better if every child died before whatever you believe the age of accountability is then?
Yeah, that's a really super fucked up. You're not giving the kids any chance to make any journey of their own to figure out whatever
Right.
whatever absolution might be for them. They don't have any choice
I
in
mean,
that.
I'm not saying that's good, but I'm saying like if you love your children more than anything in the world, which most parents do, and you think that after a certain age they might go to hell, you're like, oh, I don't know, like I don't want my
Yeah,
kids to go to hell for eternity. Like that's what I'm saying, and I hate it. And it, I have every day my struggle to not be extremely judgmental towards people's acceptance of certain belief systems. So I'm not going to, be bigoted about it. But when you combine this really common belief system that people all over the world share
mhm.
with a belief that you're causing harm, that you're teaching them poorly, that is a pretty predictable outcome.
Yeah. It's funny because I went into this documentary not thinking that there could be a lot of sympathy for her.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm sympathetic. I'm saying like I get where all this went off the rails.
I
I
would
I
I would go as far as to say that I am sympathetic. I'm not empathetic. I can't really put myself in her shoes at all.
That's a good
But
way
I
to
have
make a distinction.
sympathy because, it's like when people say, oh, well, she's going to get the help she needs. I'm like, man, that is like, I hope that she never, ever has clarity. Because,
If she gets
yeah,
clarity and being like, "Fuck, I killed these kids, my kids, because of this," how do you go on?
that's the word. That's worse than life in prison.
Yeah, that's a mental torment that is.
Clear. I mean, like, you want to talk about something that'll drive you crazy. I mean, that's like, I don't know. Everybody knows I'm a huge David Lynch fan. Like, that's the part of Twin Peaks that always gets me is when Leland Palmer is in the jail cell and he realizes what he did when he was possessed his
I've
daughter.
never watched Twin Peaks.
Oh, well, people at home know what I'm talking about.
I'm
There's a
I'm doing
moment.
I'm doing this as a means to force me to watch that show because I
Yeah,
want
that's why I'm
to
not going
and
to
I
say
just
anything else
never.
because I want you to forget what I just said.
I'll never remember it. That's okay
But
because
there is a
I'm a
moment.
man of a certain age.
There is a moment where David Lynch kind of deals with that of like what happens when a person does something because they're crazy and then they realize what they've done. And it's pretty powerful. And I think, God, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. If
Yeah,
you're crazy, you're out of your mind enough, you are in enough delusion to do that horrible thing. I hope that you never have to cope with the reality of it because I don't think the human brain is built for that.
that's fair. That's fair. And sometimes in this extenuating circumstances, things like snowball on each other to a point where it's just like, oh, I was doing this, but I was in the moment of like, it's like the whole thing where there's like not a gang mentality, but like where you're in the middle of something and everybody kind of converges on this thing. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's not a gang thing. It's a group, but group is the wrong word too. Sorry, I can't think of it. But there's just like this mob mentality. That's the word I'm looking. That's a phrase. But like we're just the mob kinds like we're just going to do this thing, and it's like a combustible thing in the moment. It's not something that you have people in that who would never in a million years do that normally, but they're in the middle of a mob mentality where all that kind of comes together, and you can't get yourself out of it. Now, again, this is not something that Andrea Yates is doing. This is not mob mentality. This is just like her postpartum psychosis,
But it
and
kind of
this
is. It kind of is because she
okay.
had that newsletter on the kitchen table. She had a tape in the tape player.
Yeah.
And you wonder if one or both of those things was missing that day, what could have changed? Because I think, and I'm not an expert on postpartum psychosis, but I think that it's probably very likely that it is a lot like people who are in crisis with suicidal ideation, where if they can be interrupted and get help, it's not necessarily a lifelong issue. Now that's for
Yeah.
some people it is. I don't think Andrea Yates was always going to want to kill her kids.
No, I think that was an in the moment, I am just overwhelmed moment in which something extraordinarily awful happened.
Yeah. And I think that people say, and I understand this because I think it myself, well, shit, but she did it 5 fucking times, right? But she was in psychosis. She was literally crazy.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that, in movies, in books, in stories of make-believe, you can overcome the crazy. You can overcome the influence of the evil spell or whatever by like loving your kids enough or loving your partner enough or whatever. But like in real life, that's just not always how it works, especially because she very, very likely thought that what she was doing was what was best for them. And I think that's why it was so important to have Moses's perspective.
For sure. Moses was a great perspective on that because he could understand where she was. And again, I agree, like the way they kind of showed all that, where it's like, here you're in a room sitting in a chair, and that just felt really goofy. But Moses, I felt, was pretty authentic, and like, here's the things that I dealt with as a kid, and here's how fucked up this made me, and all that stuff. So, yeah. There's several other characters in the last episode that just kind of like, we were doing characters,
yeah.
and
We
so
have Susie Spencer, Wendell Odom Jr., Steve Krinksil, Douglas Roberts, Ashlyn Hillard, Todd Frank, and Dr. Philip Resnick.
Yeah, so I would say Douglas Roberts, all you need to know for him is he started Survivor's website about all this. That was his contribution. Ashlyn Hillard she's a cult intervention specialist. She basically believes that Michael Wernicke was a cult guy. Not a lot for those two, in my opinion, just like that's their contribution to the whole thing. It's just Douglas Roberts, like, I was part of this cult. I'm going to start this website and people are going to come and talk about it. Ashlyn Hillard, I'm not really sure why she was in there other than just the extraordinary haircut. But like,
she's a cult intervention specialist, which again, I want to know what that means, because that can mean a lot of things. And sometimes it means bullshit.
Yeah.
Sometimes it means, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm like,
Susie Spencer wrote a book about the whole Andrea Yates trial called Breaking Point. Wendell Odom Jr., who is not in this much, but he's really compelling in the bits that he's in, where he said in the first trial for Andrea Yates, we didn't do a good job of really harping on the mental health aspect of it. Getting a second chance on that was really great.
We didn't do as good a job as we should have, which I actually really respected.
Yeah, me too.
To say we didn't do a good job, but to say we didn't do as good a job as we should have kind of acknowledges, like, it was about strategy. It was about a lot of different things, right? I don't know. Sorry. I just thought that little bit of semantics mattered to me.
Yeah. And I think, and then in the second trial, he was part of that, and he was able to kind of really champion the idea of all this mental health stuff that she was struggling with, that she didn't really get any help with. And,
he described how she appeared, like her countenance or whatever. And this is interesting to me because I think that he said, her pupils were dilated. She kept jerking her head around to look at things that weren't there. And I think sometimes that when we think about somebody being crazy, we don't think of it as actually very much like being under the influence of something. It's not the same as just like behaving in a way that doesn't make sense to other people. She actually had like symptoms. Her pupils were dilated, like that something was wrong. And I think that was important to note. That was a good piece of information to have for me as a viewer.
Yeah, and I agree. It's like Steve Grinsell, I don't think he didn't really much add to
he
it.
was there. He was so weird.
The only thing he added to the story was the idea of talking about how when Michael Rudecki came back to Grand Rapids and he was like protesting in front of churches and telling those people, and then he did something where he basically assaulted a woman, and that got him kicked out of Grand Rapids, which he said, which enabled his world tour. I'm like, whatever world tour, but like,
well, but also then he says, oh, when I heard about the Andrea Yates thing, it was like, I hope they're wrong about him. And it's like, well, but that they're not, because you already saw all this weird behavior. It was just weird. It was kind of like,
I feel like he was unnecessary. But the one guy that I thought was
from anyone,
the person that I thought was actually really compelling and interesting was Todd Frank, who was the what was it?
The jury foreman. I really
jury foreman of the second Andrea Yates trial, and he really took that and really it felt like he took like, this is my obligation to make sure that whatever this is, it's right.
Yeah, and I think that people, we have this thing that even if you acknowledge that being on a jury is important and it's your civil duty and whatever, like there's never a good time to take an unknown chunk of time out of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So most of us are like, man, I hope I don't get picked, which is, I think, creates a separation from like how serious it is when it's a case like this.
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting. We said when he got the summons, it kind of scared him because everybody knew about Andrea Yates. Everybody knew, like, there was no way you were going to get in that state where you're ever going to get in Texas, you're not going to get a fair trial no matter what jurisdiction you're moving to, because it was national news. And he made this thing where he talked about Dr. Philip Resnick, who made a comment in the trial, and he said it was a thing that really stuck with him. And I'm going to tell you, like, this is almost poetry from a guy who is a psychiatrist. I have it
written down too, yeah.
And it's the Andrea Yates' religion was the trellis upon which the ivy of her mental illness grew. Yeah. And that is something writers would be like, that is a fucking great line. And that guy said it on a stand. Now, did he rehearse that and think that was a good line?
Oh, I'm sure he did.
I'm sure he did. What were you going to say, Renee?
Sorry. Oh, no, I was just agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is interesting that he said the jury was a bit hung. There was 8 that were not guilty by reading insanity. 4 thought she was guilty. They asked to see, that's where they asked to see more items from the perilous times, because they'd only had the one sheet, which if you're the people trying to show that this was a real problem for Andrea Yates.
To be fair, they were given tracts. They were given other tracts, and they were given this poem, but they weren't given the whole newsletter, which I agree was goofy because it did make such a huge difference. But yeah, because he says everything in her delusion was in that issue of the Perilous Times.
Yeah, and that was kind of that was the impetus for like them to all kind of agree, because he got to a point where there was one person who was kind of a stalwart and who wouldn't change her vote, or his vote, and then just looked at the Perilous Times thing and was like, okay, let's vote now.
Well, so he said even after that, there was that holdout was like, we have to think about the children. We can't forget them. And this was, I think, why Todd Frank is such an important person to have here, because it's so smart. He said on the last day of deliberation, they did a 10-minute silence, 2 minutes moment of silence for each child. And then after that, he reminded them, you have to judge on the facts and the law. and allow God to judge her
Yeah.
after that. And I think like having that moment of,
In
silence,
Texas, especially.
yeah, but to have that moment of silence to allow it to be like, yes, of course, we're not us. Those of us who are voting this way are not voting this way because we don't give a shit about the kids.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that when you vote this way, you are protecting other kids. You're acknowledging that this is something that could happen, even if the mother isn't evil. Because what happens, and I think what a large part of what happened here, Rusty Yates did not come home from work when his wife was falling apart and think, my wife is evil. He thought my wife was having a hard time. And because he didn't think she was evil, he didn't think she was going to kill all of his kids.
Yep.
And so we have to work really hard to acknowledge that sometimes things that we don't understand it's not monsters. It's not evil people that are beyond our comprehension. Sometimes it is shit like postpartum psychosis. And if we understand that, then you get your wife to the hospital. You get her back medication compliant. You don't risk that 5th pregnancy.
And you don't fuck her. If you fuck her, you do some fucking goddamn birth control. Jesus Christ.
But here's the thing is I think that she agreed to that.
Oh, agreed. I'm just saying, like, at that point, if the doctor said there's this risk, it's a 50, he said it was a 50-50 risk. That's too much.
Here's the thing you got to think about, though, is that when people say 50-50, it's like, meh, 50-50.
Not for me.
I understand not thinking it that way. I do, because they also didn't say how serious postpartum psychosis is.
That's true.
They didn't make it, I mean, like, not postpartum depression, which is on its own, if it never, ever, ever progresses into psychosis. Postpartum depression is extremely fucking serious.
Yeah, for sure.
Postpartum psychosis results in stuff like this. It happens. Yeah. And they did not sit down with Andrea Yates and her husband and make it clear, this is serious. You have to stay on your meds. You have to get therapy. You cannot have another baby.
Well, there was another thing that was it. I don't know if you caught it, but it was like where they were talking about this chance that it could, and they were like, they got to a point after 2 weeks when she was institutionalized the second time, and we're like, maybe she should be home, and maybe and Rusty was like, I think that was code for your insurance ran out, and we don't need to get a whole diatribe about how shitty the health insurance industry is for the U.S., but I totally believe him when he said that. I think that's
well, I think that is why I had some empathy for him, because when this happened, the way that people came for him, I believed, and this might be looking back based on how I felt more than what was stated, but I believed that he was, I don't give a shit how you feel, we're having more kids. That is how it was presented. That's how he was treated in the press. And then you find out he was taking her, he was changing their living environment. He was getting her hospitalized. He was getting her on medication. He was talking to the doctors, but insurance won't keep her in the hospital, but the doctors aren't giving him all the information that he needs. But it's like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe he would have made the same decisions had he been given the appropriate information and told how serious it was. Maybe he would have. I don't fucking know.
We'll never know.
But they didn't do that. And that's a big deal. That's a huge deal, because those doctors are the only people in fucking 2001 that had the information. It's not like, again, it's not like you could go type into Google, this is what's going on with my wife, and find a Reddit about postpartum psychosis.
Or some dumb AI summation, but yes.
But you know what I mean? It's like we have, not that I think that's a good alternative to medical care, but at least with the amount of concern he did seem to have, where he was trying to find a way to help her, I think that if he had information, he would have accepted it. But he didn't have the information, and we didn't live in a world where information like that was as readily available if you didn't get it directly from your doctor.
True. So yeah, any last comments on this? Because like I said, this kind of took a whole different tact on how I looked at Andrea Yates, because
Yeah.
I had a very different view of this, but the idea of just like knowing the strain she was under from what was being pumped into her brain so much, yeah, it's different view. So any other ideas? Got things to talk
I
about?
just, I think about, like, I think it's just one of those things. Like, we have the US as a developed country has the worst maternal and infant morbidity and mortality any
Mhm.
other developed country. We have terrible care for mothers.
And
And
super expensive care.
and I think that this is an example of that. And unfortunately, it's easy for people to say that this isn't an example of that because she's the crazy bitch who killed her kids. But it is, because the information wasn't there
Yep.
and care that she needed wasn't there.
Yeah. It's easy to say, but like the thing is like we see time and time again in this healthcare system that we have, which is utter shite, is just like how do you find the people that will help you? Because there's a lot of bureaucracy in that, and like especially in mental health, or just like I have a brother who his he had a stroke and he can't get, like, the idea of getting him help is really difficult, like extremely difficult, and he's disabled. Like she was disabled in a different way. So
Yeah. One to think of, like, you have a mother of 5 children who is delusional and hallucinating. And you say, well, I think you should send her back with the kids.
yeah, it just go back. Maybe the home environment's better.
And they could have recommended intensive outpatient if there really was no other way. Like, there's just so many things that could have happened and should have happened. And I understand that even if we had everybody had the best insurance in the world, like, you can't just keep people forever. But
Yeah.
the thing about postpartum stuff is that it is influenced by the hormones. It doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is so depressing about this, and so ultimately so tragic, is that if she had gotten the appropriate care at the right time, it literally could have been completely avoided and
Yep.
never been a problem again.
Yeah. So yeah, that is the cult behind the killer, the Andrea Yates story. There's, like I said, there's quite a few avenues that we could have talked even more on, which is interesting because it was just a three episode show.
Yeah, I think we could have done 3 episodes of this show on it, because there was
Yeah, we could. Each episode we could have just done one episode of this show for each episode. So yeah, but yeah. So let's talk a bit about. Well, I'm going to show the graphic. This is what we'll be talking about next month. If I pull us out of there, hold on. All right.
whatever that did made it so that we couldn't hear each other.
Yeah, that was very odd. So anyway, I can't remember if it was you or I who brought this up. I think it was me, but I'm not positive.
I think it's going to be interesting. Everything I know about Real Housewives, I know from watching The Traitors. So it's going to be really interesting to me.
Are you watching it only because Alan Cumming is on it, or
100%. But of course, and because it's addictive. But yeah, I love Alan Cumming.
yeah,
I'll watch him in anything. And the outfit changes. Are you kidding me?
yeah. So anyway, we're going to be talking about that next month. The Cult of the Real Housewife. I have not ever watched any episode of the Real Housewives of anything.
I don't think I have either.
So yeah, this is going to be weird and interesting and fun.
Before we really go. Also, I have something I forgot that I wanted to share.
Yeah, please go.
If you're in Southern California, or if you feel like traveling, you can travel. I'll let you.
You allow it? Okay.
Hold on. I gotta get somewhere where there's a freaking image for this. But as I've been saying for the last couple weeks, Dirge Magazine is coming back for real, for real.
Yeah.
We're working on all kinds of stuff. If you follow us on social media, you've seen some of our crazy social media stuff. You're getting your you up texts from Dirge Magazine, and we are going to have a massive relaunch party that is going to be so fucking fun. We have pictures of drag queens in bathrooms, photographs, art. We have butterflies that have penises for bodies. We have vases with boobs. You're never gonna see another launch party like this anywhere in the world. I promise you, it's gonna be so fucking fun. I don't have the graphic for it. Anyway, I don't know where it is. It's on my iPad, whatever. It is here in Joshua Tree on Valentine's Day at 5:00 at the world famous Art Queen at Coyote Little Gallery. And if you follow me, RA Pickup, on Instagram or Facebook, you will find out more about it. If you follow my art account, Art Postasy, you will find out more about it. If you follow Dirge on Instagram or Facebook, you will find out more about it. If that's Dirge Magazine on all socials, you can sign up for our newsletter and you will find out more about it. It's very fucking easy to find out about it because we will not shut up about it. We're super fucking excited about it because wouldn't you be excited if it was going to be drag queens in bathrooms and butterflies with penises and boob faces, and there's going to be cake and all kinds of other stuff. It's going to be so much fun. And one of my favorite local bands is playing also. So
awesome. I have something that I should have available to you for Dirge. So
yes.
That's going to be interesting and fun. I am working on that. I don't have a finalized first draft of it yet, but I'm looking forward to putting that out for you folks. So Dirge Magazine, please follow it everywhere on social media. But
we're so easy.
Go ahead.
I just said we're so easy to find.
Yeah. And I'm very glad this is coming back in full force. So Renee, you deserve a lot of kudos for that. So thank you.
Thank you. It's only driving me a little bit insane right now.
All right. Excuse me. Next month we will see you. We are going to do, like I said, we're going to do this particular thing, the Real Housewives of, hiccuping. The Real Housewives, the Cult of the Real Housewives next month. And we're going to do that, and it's going to be fun and interesting. So, Anyway, thank you everybody for watching us and joining us. And if you have any comments or whatever, let us know and follow us. And we're going to have some fun next month. So cheers.